I've been reporting about the energy transition for the last 6 or 7 years. And one of the things I've noticed in Canada is there's a misconception about what that is. Because a lot of people think if you just substitute wind, solar, and battery storage for coal, oil, and natural gas, voila, the energy transition is done. That is so not the case. The energy transition is a fundamental restructuring of how we produce electricity, how we produce energy, consume energy, what we do with it in buildings and industry and transportation. This is a fundamental stuff, folks. It's like the Industrial Revolution point, 4. So to talk about that is we're going to chat with Robert Hornung, who's the Executive Director of the Canadian Renewable Energy Association and their annual convention, which they're going to have next month. And this is on the agenda. So welcome to the interview, Robert.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Now, I apologize for that long-winded introduction, but I wanted to set the stage for the conversation you and I are going to have. So does my take on the energy transition in Canada and how you're going to approach it in your conference, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because the energy transition is not simply a matter of cleaning up the electricity grid. That's an important component of the energy transition, but it goes much more broadly than that. As you referenced, it relates to how we produce, transport, and use energy going forward. And electricity is going to have a very important role to play. We want that electricity to be as clean as possible. We want to use that electricity in as many applications as possible where it can provide environmental benefits and efficiency benefits going forward. But essentially, if we think about what are we looking for in 2050, we want an electricity system that's going to be efficient, we want it to be affordable, we want it to be clean, and we want it to be reliable. And that there's not a single technology that provides that. It's going to be groups of technologies coming together. And in fact, our association brought together, for example, wind, solar, and energy storage, because we know that those technologies working together can contribute more as a collective than they can individually. It's going to be combined with other technologies. Energy efficiency has to be front and center, first and foremost, in any sort of energy transition strategy. We're going to see it affect all end uses. How we work with transportation, how we heat and cool our buildings is going to change. And in the end, what we're going to see, the technological evolution has been so immense that what we're really moving towards is an energy system that will be much more diverse, much more distributed, and in which individuals will play a much greater role in terms of contributing to that system. And we're already seeing signs of that with the growing levels of customer and consumer interest in energy choices and what technologies they're using going forward. So,
yeah, I would have to agree with that. I mean, we mentioned wind, solar, and battery storage. Well, there's 3 technologies, but there are literally thousands and thousands of technologies at play here, and you can't produce enough electricity. We may require 2, 3, 4 times as much electricity nationally in 2050 as we produce and consume today. And that doesn't come without a lot of hard work and a lot of capital investment and policy and regulatory change. All of that is necessary to make the transition.
Absolutely. And it's, in many ways, the challenges we face are in part technological challenges, but frankly, technology is evolving and moving forward at a pace that it's outstripping our ability to design markets that enable us to capture these technologies, to develop regulatory frameworks to ensure that these technologies can move forward quickly and efficiently, to build the infrastructure required to be able to take advantage of these technologies. So in many ways, the challenge we face is less a technology challenge and more a policy, market, and regulatory challenge. And certainly in our forum, we'll be exploring some of those themes. We'll look at how our core technologies that we work with in the association, how they collaborate together, for example, in hybrid projects to deliver a broader range of solutions for utilities and consumers. But we'll also look at how they combine with other technologies, whether it's heat pumps or energy efficiency, for example, to produce net zero buildings. So we're in a very interesting time where there's such a blossoming of options that have emerged. Really, our challenge now is to figure out how can we design the system to allow us to access and take advantage of as many of those as possible to move us to where we want to go.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'll illustrate what you're talking about with a study, actually a series of deep dives that I'm working on for BC. So in BC Hydro, you know, it's had 60, 70 years of hydroelectric dams, very stable, very cheap, very clean. But now the BC government wants to electrify a lot of the economy as part of Clean BC to bring down emissions. So their studies vary, but it could be a doubling or tripling of electricity consumption and production by 2050. And BC Hydro can't build any more dams. So now you're moving to wind and solar. Well, how do you integrate those into the grid? Do you go with a market system like Ontario and Alberta? How do you hold auctions? How do you design a wholesale market? I mean, once you open that Pandora's box, you have many, many questions that you now have to grapple with, and they're not easy. They don't have easy answers. And that's, I think, a good example of the challenges, but opportunities that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the challenges are real, but I also think they're not insurmountable. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is that there's a growing consensus, I think, on what some of the key elements of the energy transition have to be and have to look like. And therefore, if you've got agreement on what you're trying to do, it's easier than to bring all the parties together and talk about, well, what's the most efficient way to do that? How do we tweak this? How do we change this? And I think we're starting to see that emerging and going forward. And you know, in our forum, we're looking at, you know, where we have sessions where we're speaking with industry leaders and saying, okay, how do we as an industry contribute to the energy transition? We're going to speak to utility leaders and people who run electricity system operators and say, how do you see us fitting in? And we're going to talk to consumers and say, well, how do we fit into your picture also of where we're going? And I think we're going to find a lot of common ground amongst those audiences, which then allow us to work together to find those solutions.
This is fascinating, Robert. We could talk about this for hours, but of course we'd bore our listeners to death. So what I'm going to do is I'll be interviewing as many of your presenters and folks that show up in your panels as I can to provide some insight into the issues we just discussed. Good luck with your conference. I look forward to covering some of it. And thank you for talking to us today.
No, appreciate the opportunity, and yeah, certainly do encourage people to attend the conference if they can. It's running over a couple of days. We've got about 50 speakers participating in about 15 sessions covering all of the themes we've discussed here. So I think you'll find good value there. Thank you very much.
November 9th and 10th, and it's all virtual, and you can find the information if you Google Canadian Renewable Energy Association. You'll find the information on the website. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.